Hello and welcome to the Wake Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alejandra Moreno.
And I'm Taylor Kaufman.
And today we're going to talk about wills or no wills, right? What happens if you pass away with a will? What happens with you if you pass away without a will? And is there really that much of a difference? Not really, but there are a few minor differences. So we have clients come to our office all the time, and they'll, somebody passed away, their husband, their mom, and they'll give us a will, and we'll start talking about probate. Okay, this is what we need to get started. We'll start explaining the process, and they're like, wait, why probate? I just showed you the will. And we're like, oh, surprise.
Yeah.
Wills go to probate.
Yes, that's a big surprise for a lot of people.
So let's talk a little bit about how that works, what probate is, and what happens if you pass away without a will or with a will. So the probate process, if you pass away, it's a court proceeding, right, where you hire an attorney, they go before a judge, they open your case, they determine who your beneficiaries are, and then the assets, right, anything that was in the person's name, bank accounts, house, real estate, anything that was in their name is now going to be transferred to their heirs. So that's the basic probate process. So what does that look like when you don't have a will?
So when you don't have a will, it kind of looks like a similar process, right? You still have to go through probate. You have to hire an attorney, open up a probate case. I would say the two biggest differences is when you pass away with a will, the will dictates who the personal representative is going to be and how distributions are going to be made.
Right. So the personal representative is going to be the person that is in charge of your estate, right? You're no longer here. So I designate this person to hire an attorney, to open up the case, to start liquidating my assets, to sell my real estate, whatever the will says. And then at the end of the case, it goes to your beneficiaries, right? Yes. So if you have a will, the will also states your beneficiaries. But if you don't have a will, who's going to be the personal representative? So at least in Florida, and all states have their own statutes, right? But in Florida, it's going to have a hierarchy of who can serve, right? But sometimes that can turn into a battle.
Yeah.
Right? When you have, especially with these mixed families where you have stepkids and stepmom, well, I'm the surviving spouse. I want to be the personal representative. Yeah, but I'm his first child. I've known him longer than you, right? And then it turns into this battle of who can get more consents, right? Of all the siblings, they all consent to me, so I have the priority. But at the end of the day, both individuals are going to go in front of a judge, and then the judge decides.
Right, and that's a big thing, right? Like you said, a lot of people think that a will avoids probate, but it doesn't. It really just gives the judge direction on how to distribute the assets and who to appoint. But with or without a will, you're still going to court, and you still need to hire an attorney.
Absolutely, and a will, at least, you have 3 kids. One is not a great kid. They didn't behave very well throughout their life. And you want to disinherit them. You want to leave them out of your will. Okay, you can do that. You can't disinherit a spouse, right? Under the Florida statutes, a spouse is entitled to at least 30% of your estate. So you should not disinherit your spouse, but it turns into a litigation, right? Yes. Now we're fighting in court. And we know litigation can take years, and it's very expensive. So you want to make sure that you're thinking very carefully about this. It's not just, who do I want as my personal representative? Who do I want to disinherit? Like, this kid, wasn't a great son, or whatever the case may be. You really want to think about, and you want to have an experienced attorney. And you mentioned in an earlier podcast, that helps our dynamic, right? Because we do the probate side and the planning side. So when somebody says, like, I want to disinherit this kid, we can be like, okay, if that's what you want, but let me explain to you how that works.
Right.
When you disinherit a kid, let me explain to you how that looks in front of a judge, how the process looks, how long it's, so, we have other, I want to say, tips and tricks, tools that we can include in your will. So, you maybe benefit somebody more because you appreciated them more throughout your life, but, you're trying to ensure that this is not going to be litigated.
Yes.
That's, I think, very important.
It is important, and I don't think a lot of people realize what litigation is, or what a probate process is. Right? You're not only you're grieving someone, but then you're having to hire an attorney and deal with documents, and then litigation. So it's causing family tension as well.
Definitely, it's, and you can tell clients a million times, like, this is what litigation is. It's gonna be super expensive, and years are gonna go by, and then it's super expensive, and years go by, and they're like, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I did.
We tried to warn you, but then it becomes, and it's a long road.
And I don't want to knock on wills, because I think it's a great document.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great resource for certain clients. Again, that's why it's important to talk to an estate planning attorney. A lot of people are like, I'll just do it on Google. Like, Google is not going to tell you, or LegalZoom is not going to tell you, like, I know that's what you want, but why don't you consider this?
Right.
So we can try to mitigate any. Google's not going to tell you how to sign this thing, who has to be present. Like, there is a ceremony that goes along with a will signing. And I think that's something that, people kind of want to take the easy route out. And to be honest, having an attorney do it is not that much more expensive, but you have peace of mind.
Yep, of course. It's actually funny you mentioned that, because one of my close friends came to me. Her sister just had a baby, and she's like, my sister had these estate planning documents prepared. Like, do you mind reviewing them? And I was like, of course, I'll review them for you. And her sister got these documents drafted because they just had a baby. So they wanted to make sure everything was in line. And she's in finance, and she works for like a bigger firm, and they offer like some sort of like legal service where it's like a plug and play. It's kind of like a Google Doc. So I was reviewing these documents, and the first thing that stood out to me was it was signed in black ink. And like, if like, it should be in blue. You have to be able to tell an original from a copy, especially with a will or any document, because it's important to make sure it's an original. And the second thing I noticed is that it mentioned the baby, but in a will, you can also, aside from naming a personal representative and saying how you want your assets to be distributed, you can also name someone as a guardian for your minor children.
Of course.
So if you pass away and you have a child that's a minor, you can name someone as a guardian that's going to take care of your child. And that to me was, I would think that was a main reason why they wanted to make these documents. I mean, obviously, you're still going to have to go through probate. You can name someone, but, for their child. So that was one of the big things that stood out to me. And there was obviously others too. Like, there's an updated notary block, just things that attorneys, we're up to date on all the laws, and we make sure that everything is signed correctly, right? And if it's not signed correctly, that's not to say that the will is not going to get admitted. And, at our firm, we've gotten these wills admitted, and we've done everything we can as attorneys to.
But it ends up being a lot more expensive.
A lot more expensive and lengthy and everything. So it is important to make sure that you have these documents drafted by an attorney, and to be able to know what you need in these documents, right? Like, they thought they had these like solid proof documents, and they were like, this is it, like, check it out.
Like, no,
I was like, okay, no.
This is not it. Yeah. I mean, you started practicing a little bit after me. So you had, you didn't have to go deposit original wills in court, which is what we used to do. But when you would take an original will to the courthouse, if it's in blue ink, because you mentioned the black ink, if it's in blue ink, you kind of look at it, you're like, okay, yeah, that's an original. Mm-hmm. But when it was in black ink, the clerks would have like, those little like microscopes that jewelers have.
Oh my gosh.
And they would, really, really get in there.
Yeah.
And they're like, is this an original? I don't know. It could be a copy. And then now you're maybe going to have to hire a handwriting expert to determine if this is an original. Yeah. It's not cheap.
No.
So little things like that, Google's not going to tell you.
No, it's not. And, it can save you all that time and energy of just signing in blue ink, but they didn't know, unfortunately. But
actually, on the way here, you mentioned, like, I got to do something. I got to do a trust.
Yes.
And when I first started practicing, and you're recently married, so yes, it's the right time. When I started practicing, I had a few consultations where clients, I'm like trying to explain to them the will. This is a great option for you. And they're like, do you have a will? And I know I'm always like saying Spanish sayings to you and translating them, and they sound kind of stupid in English, but there is a saying in Spanish that's casa de herrero, cuchillo de palo. What that means is at the blacksmith's house, they eat with wooden spoons, with wooden knives. What you would think a blacksmith has, the iron knives that cut super sharp, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like we don't take our own advice.
True.
There's so many doctors that haven't gotten a checkup in so many years. So after like the third client asked me if I had a will, I was like, okay, this is embarrassing. I need to do a will. And at that time, literally all I had were student loans and my wiener dogs. Mm-hmm. That's all I had. And I was like, you know what? That is what meant most to me. And I was like, if something happens to me, that's what I really care about.
Yeah.
So I made sure that my will, I didn't have the money for a pet trust, right? And that's something we could talk about in another episode. But I put something in writing. Mm-hmm. I put something in writing, and I was like, what do I cherish the most? And that was a little bit of the inspiration behind the ASM Law Group slogan, preserving what matters most for those who matter most. Mm-hmm. It's not about money, you know. It's about making sure that whatever you cherish, you're able to preserve it. Right? Because
that's huge.
Isn't that when we're not here to take care of it, don't we want to make sure it's taken care of?
Of course.
So you wait until a client asks you.
Yeah, I mean, you just put me on blast on the podcast. So next podcast, I will for sure have my estate planning documents in line. But that's right.
And I really do think a will is a great tool. And for certain clients, that's the way to go. They don't need anything else.
Yeah.
But obviously it has its downsides. Probate is one of them. What do you think are some of the other downsides of dealing with a probate or a will?
So, I mean, I would say another downside is that it can be expensive, right? Like you have to go through a court process. So you're going to have to hire an attorney, and under the Florida statutes, the Florida attorney is entitled to 3% of the estate assets. So once you marshal in all the assets and you come up with a number of what the estate is worth, like everyone, the bank accounts and things like that, it's 3% of that, which can be pretty pricey. You know, that money can be going to the beneficiaries with another vehicle. And I just think it's important for people to know, like you said, a will is not a bad document, but I would like people to know more like that. You still have to go through probate, I think that people think they can avoid it. But so yeah, it being costly is one thing. And then, the time factor, like you're dealing with the court. So it's not like you're just signing a document and you're dealing with someone that's going to be able to distribute these documents right away or these assets right away. Like you're at the mercy of the courts, and these judges have thousands of cases, and we try our best to push these probate cases through, and we have a very good system, I must say. But it's at some point it's out of our hands, and we're just waiting for the court to sign. So,
and we practice all over the state of Florida, and I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I like practicing in the smaller counties because things just happen a lot faster because the volume is a lot lower. In Miami-Dade, even Broward, even West Palm, they have so many cases, the volume so much. When you submit something to the court, you now have to wait for the clerk to accept it. You have to wait for it to get to the judge.
Right.
You have to, submit all of the paperwork. It has to, appear. You have to know that the judge can see it before they can sign the order. So and that's completely out of our hands.
Yeah.
And if there's something big going on in the court, it might take, a week for our petitions to be accepted. If it's a slower, week, but we can't determine when that's going to be. We can't tell the client it's going to take a week. It's going to take 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We can give them based on our process, right? Because we have experience in how this works. We can tell them, look, it's going to be between this and this, but we also are at the mercy of the court.
Right.
If the judge is out, if the judge is in a trial, they're not going to sign orders. And, the judges in Miami-Dade, they're excellent. They're signing orders at 10 p.m., at 7 in the morning. They're really trying to move the caseload along, but they're human. It's only so much they can do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're definitely, the time factor is a big one.
It is a big one. And, also, if you have a will, you wouldn't have to necessarily deal with this. But if you don't have a will, you mentioned a preference of appointment for the personal representative. And you also touched on having beneficiaries consent, which now they just changed the Florida law that in Miami-Dade for now, you have to have all the beneficiaries not only consent, but you have to have them notarize the document as well. So not only you have to track down these beneficiaries, you have to explain the process and see if they want to, consent to this person being appointed. And then you have to add the layer of also you need to go get this document notarized. So
and Miami-Dade is such a melting pot of people and from different places and cultures. You have somebody from South America, for example, that owned a condo here in Brickell, and they pass away, but all of their heirs are in South America. So now getting a notarized consent, they have to, we have to send them the document. It has to be translated. They have to get it notarized in their country. They have to have it apostilled in their country.
Right.
When we get the document, we have to do a legal translation. I mean, that in and of itself is getting very expensive, right? And until we get all of those consents to appoint the personal representative, to get approval to sell the condo, whatever it is, the condo fees are generating, all of the expenses are generating, the cost of notarizing, apostille, translating these documents are generating. So what do the heirs really end up with?
Yeah. No, so not as much as they would, No, it's unfortunate, but, again, going through probate with a will isn't the end of the world.
No,
but it's important for clients to understand what they're kind of getting into when they sign these documents. And, being an estate planning attorney and probate, we like you said, we see both sides. But there are, I don't want to say there's ways around it, getting consents, but that's what makes, I think, us great at our jobs too. And I've learned a lot from you, but kind of navigating that, being able to deal with the beneficiaries and deal with the courts. Like you said, Miami-Dade and Broward, and even though our firm is in Miami-Dade, like we've had cases all the way up in North Florida
everywhere,
too.
yeah.
So, and you're pretty familiar with like all those, counties and everything, which makes a difference.
And I would say that's one of the benefits of the pandemic. All of these courts really like jumped on the bandwagon, the online bandwagon. Because I remember when I first started practicing, if we had we couldn't take cases in North Florida. If we had a case in Collier, we had to drive there.
Yeah.
We had to go to Naples. We had to go to Orlando. So a lot of times it was like not really worth it because it was going to be too expensive for us to be traveling, and we didn't want to, offset that cost on the client. So we would find local counsel and, refer it out. But thanks to the pandemic, like we're really, since 2020, we've been practicing all over the state of Florida, and it's really nice. It's really nice to see like the different counties, the dynamics, how they work, and I think we have a nice system. We know how the probates work in all those different counties, and the probate world is kind of small in the sense that not a lot of people do this, right? I think it's pretty specialized. In Miami, most of the probate estate planning attorney, we kind of know each other.
Yeah.
And we would see each other in court twice a week when we used to go. I miss it. But it's really broadened our horizons, and I think that also has made us a lot more capable in what we do because we see how it's done in other counties. We see so many varieties of the same case that I think for me at least, has been very enriching.
Yes, no, I agree with that, and I will say that I wouldn't say Miami-Dade is rough or it's hard, but I feel like being able to do a probate in Miami-Dade prepares you to do a probate on the rest of the state because Miami-Dade is very specific, and like that's what I'm used to. And when we go to these other states, like I feel like we are so prepared and it moves so much quicker because
we're used to it. We're used to. I mean, it's a big city, so it's like a grind, right? Yeah. The other counties are a little more relaxed. There's less going on. It's great. I appreciate it so much. But I think you're right. I think sometimes we oversubmit to these smaller counties, and we're like, oh, but you need the original or what? And they're like, why do we need the original? I'm like, you trust me? Like, what do you mean?
Yes.
It's a different environment. It's lovely. But yeah, I mean, the bulk of our practice is down here because we're down here, but it's great.
Yeah, it is.
So I like I said before, I think a will is a great vehicle for a lot of clients. Like you said, they have to know what they're getting. Yeah. They have to know what's going to happen if they have these documents. So, if you have a will or you don't have a will, but probate is just not for you, it seems like too much of a headache, it's a nightmare, it's too expensive, then there are options. Yeah. And we will definitely be discussing all of those options and making sure that our viewers start learning about what they can do for themselves, right? So thank you so much for joining us. If you like our content, please follow us along. We will be dropping weekly podcasts discussing all of these issues, getting really into the details of all these documents. And we really thank you for joining us. On behalf of ASM Law Group, preserving what matters most for those who matter most. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Wake is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The discussions in this podcast are meant to bring awareness to important issues, but they should not be considered a substitute for professional legal guidance. If you need legal advice tailored to your specific situation, please consult a qualified attorney.